Alara Voss had learned, a long time ago, how to make herself small. Not small in the way of being weak. Small in the way of taking up just enough space to exist without drawing attention. She moved through the edges of the Moonshard Pack's territory, like water moves through cracks in stone. Quietly, without force, finding the path of least resistance. She worked in the healing cottage near the border, grinding medicines, cataloging herbs, carrying supplies from one end of the pack compound to the other. The wolves barely looked at her. That was, mostly, exactly what she wanted. She had grown up near this place. Her father, Doran Voss, had been a scholar, a gentle, distracted, brilliant man who spent more of his waking hours inside books than outside them. He had made some kind of arrangement with the previous Alpha, years before Alara was born, that allowed the two of them to live near the pack's outer boundary. Alara never fully understood the details of that arrangement. Her father would smile when she asked, in the soft, evasive way he had, when a question came too close to something he wasn't ready to explain, and he would say, "When the time is right, you'll understand everything." He died before the time was right. He left her a small house, a large collection of books, and a journal she had never been able to bring herself to open. She stayed, because he had asked her to. She worked, because she needed to eat. She kept her eyes low and her voice careful, and she told herself, on the harder days, that this was enough. It was on a Tuesday, an ordinary, gray, fog-covered Tuesday, that everything changed. She had been asked to bring a tray of supplies to the formal courtyard where the pack's senior members were gathered for their weekly meeting. She had done this dozens of times without incident. She knew the route. She knew where to stand, how to move, how to be invisible. But the fog was thick that morning, and someone had left a bucket exactly where her feet expected empty ground, and the tray left her hands before she could stop it. Glass vials scattered across the stone, cloth wrappings unrolled in every direction. The sound was enormous in the sudden silence that followed. Alara stood in the middle of it, her empty hands still extended in front of her, and looked up to find every wolf in the courtyard staring at her. Seraphine stepped forward first. She was beautiful in the way sharp things are beautiful, precise and cold and designed to cut. She was the beta female of the pack, which meant she was second in rank among the females, which meant she had spent years understanding that image was power. She looked at Alara and she smiled, and then she laughed, and every wolf around her laughed with her, because that was how it worked when someone like Seraphine decided something was funny. "The little human," Seraphine said, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "Thinks she belongs here." She tilted her head in a performance of sympathy. How adorable, how completely pathetic. Alara did not cry. She had learned not to, a long time ago, because tears gave people the satisfaction of knowing they had landed somewhere real. She crouched down instead and gathered everything from the ground, every vial, every cloth, every scattered piece, with calm, steady hands. When she had it all collected, she stood up straight, met Seraphine's eyes for exactly 1 second, and walked away. The laughter followed her all the way to the cottage door. She set the tray down on the work table and stood with her back to the room for a moment, breathing evenly. Then she got back to work, because what else was there to do? At the far edge of the courtyard, an old woman had watched the entire thing without laughing. Elder Marin, the oldest living wolf in the territory, stood with her hands folded, and her expression unreadable. She watched Alara's back until the cottage door closed. Then she looked at the sky, and then at her own hands, as though she was calculating something she had been waiting a long time to calculate. She said nothing. She went back to her business, but she did not forget what she had seen. 3 days later, a royal summons arrived at the Moonshard Pack. Alpha King Caelum Drevon was conducting a territory inspection. This happened rarely enough that the news sent the entire compound into a state of barely controlled panic. Floors were cleaned that had already been clean. Wolves who had not thought about their appearance in months suddenly cared very much about it. Seraphine began preparing herself with a focused intensity that made it clear she had thought about this possibility for a long time and had a plan. Everyone knew the king had not yet taken a queen. Everyone had a theory about who it would eventually be. Seraphine had stopped treating it as a theory some time ago. Caelum Drevon arrived at dawn, riding in with 12 royal guards behind him, and he was exactly what everyone had expected. and somehow still more than that. He was tall, dark-haired, and moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had not had to prove himself in a very long time. His expression was perfectly controlled. He had done hundreds of these inspections. They were necessary and tedious, and he had learned to move through them efficiently. He walked the boundary records. He reviewed the patrol logs. He asked the right questions, and received the right answers, and was exactly as thorough as he needed to be. Then the wind shifted. He was crossing the outer healing courtyard. One of his guards had already noted it as medically routine, nothing worth the king's specific attention, when something in the air stopped him. Not a sound, not a sight, a scent, warm and strange and entirely human, reaching him across the courtyard like a hand pressed flat against his chest. His body stopped before his mind finished processing the information. Beside him, Reed, his second-in-command, who had served him for 9 years and seen him walk through burning buildings without breaking stride, noticed the king stop and said absolutely nothing, because he had never once seen the king stop mid-stride. Cael's expression did not change. He filed the information somewhere internal and continued the inspection, because he was the Alpha King, and stopping in the middle of an official inspection to investigate a scent was not something he was prepared to explain to anyone. He sat through the formal dinner. He said the correct things to the Alpha. He allowed Seraphine to position herself beside him and deliver her carefully prepared observations about pack governance, and he heard every word and responded appropriately, and all of it registered somewhere very far away from where his actual attention was. He found Ilara in the kitchen doorway. She had been pulled in as last-minute help for the dinner service. 2 of the regular staff had fallen sick, and she was available and capable, and nobody thought about whether it was appropriate to put a human woman in front of the Alpha King, because nobody had thought about Ilara's appropriateness in anything for a very long time. She was carrying a large platter and concentrating entirely on holding it level, and she did not notice the king's eyes on her until she glanced up and found them already there. She looked away immediately, the way she had learned to do. He did not. Reed, watching from across the room, felt something significant and entirely unprecedented settle into the air around the king's table. After dinner, Cael walked the border alone. He followed the scent without announcing himself, without any particular intention, simply following because some part of him was no longer interested in ignoring it. He found Ilara sitting outside the healing cottage in the cool evening air, reading by firelight. She was completely unaware of him. She turned a page. She pulled her knees up slightly. She looked, in that moment, like someone who had found the one place in the world where they could simply exist without explaining themselves. He watched her for 4 minutes, then he said, "Good evening." She startled badly. The book nearly left her hands, and then collected herself with impressive speed. She set the book down, looked at him, and her expression moved through several things before arriving at the careful steadiness she seemed to carry everywhere. She did not bow in the elaborate, practiced way the packwolves did. She simply inclined her head with quiet respect. "Good evening," she said. He asked her name. She told him. He asked how long she had lived at the border. She told him that too, briefly, without dressing the answer up in anything it wasn't. Then he asked why she stayed so close to the pack, rather than living further away, in the human village, where things might be easier. She paused. Then she told him the truth. Her father had asked her to stay near, and she had not yet found a reason strong enough to leave. He stood in the firelight and looked at her and asked, "What was your father's name?" When she said Doran Voss, he went very still. He knew that name. There was a sealed document in the Royal Archives bearing it, delivered 15 years ago, flagged as irrelevant, filed away and forgotten. He had never read it himself. He had been told it was the work of an obsessive human scholar and not worth the king's time. He left the border without explaining any of this. He found Reed, told him to retrieve the document from the archives immediately, and said nothing else. The document arrived in 3 days. Cael read it alone, in the early hours of the morning, when the palace was completely silent. Doran Voss had spent 30 years decoding a prophecy carved into the foundation stones of the oldest pack temple, a prophecy that was older than the Alpha King line itself. It described a human soul, born under a lunar eclipse to a bloodline that had made an ancient, forgotten sacrifice for the wolves. It said this person would be the anchor that held the supernatural world together when everything began to fracture. It called her the eternal anchor. It said the Alpha King of that era would recognize her by scent before sight. It said that to reject her was to choose the destruction of everything. Doran Voss had believed his daughter was that person. He had sent the document to the royal archives, hoping it would reach the right king at the right moment. He told Alara nothing, because he did not want her life shaped by something she could not choose for herself. Cael sat with this for a long time. He did not, generally, believe in prophecies. His entire reign had been built on strategy, clear thinking, and the understanding that the world responded to action, not fate. And yet, there was the matter of 4 minutes standing in the darkness, watching a woman read by firelight, and feeling, for the first time in his adult life, that he was standing exactly where he was supposed to be. He told Reed they were going back to Moonshard. He found her in the healing cottage, organizing supplies. He knocked on the open doorframe. She turned and went through her expressions again, surprise, then wariness, then that particular steadiness, and asked if he needed something from the healer. He said he needed to speak with her. He showed her the copy of her father's document. He watched her face while she read it, her hands going still, her breathing slowing, and when she finished, she looked up and asked him 2 questions. "Do you believe it? What do you want from me?" He told her the truth to both. He said he did not know exactly what he believed, but he knew what he had experienced, and he was not able to walk away from it. He said he wanted nothing from her that she did not freely choose to give. He said he understood that this was strange and unfair and impossible in several directions, and he was not there to make demands. She asked him to leave her alone for 1 hour. He waited outside. Exactly 60 minutes later, she came out and told him she would come to the royal palace for 2 weeks. Not as anything official, not as anything with a title attached to it, simply as someone who wanted to understand what her father had believed, and what it meant, and whether any of it was real. She wanted honesty, and nothing performed. He agreed without hesitation. When Seraphine heard that Alara was leaving for the royal palace with the king, the expression on her face changed in a way that had nothing to do with amusement anymore. The palace was large and formal, and full of people watching Alara with careful eyes. She moved through it the same way she moved through everything, steadily, without pretending to a confidence she didn't feel, without flinching at the watching. Cael gave her access to the royal archives. He arranged a reading room near the library. He sat across a table from her in the evenings, while she read her father's materials, and he worked through his own correspondence, and they talked when she had questions, and they were comfortable in the quiet when she didn't. He began to notice that the part of his day he thought about most, while he was doing everything else, was this. Halfway through the 2nd week, a border conflict between 2 powerful outer pacts landed on his desk. It was a decision with no clean answer. Any choice would upset someone important. He was reviewing the files late in the evening when Alara looked up from her father's notes and asked a single quiet question that shifted the entire frame of the problem. He stared at her. She said she might be missing something. He told her she was missing nothing at all. On the last evening of the 2 weeks, he told her he did not want her to go back to Ashfen. He said it plainly. He said it had nothing to do with strategy, and it had nothing to do with the prophecy, and he would not hold her if she needed to leave, but he wanted her to know what was actually true. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him she had known for about 10 days. She told him she was frightened, and that she was staying anyway. The formal council convened 3 months later. Every pack representative in the territory was present. Cael stood at the head of the hall and spoke without preparation, without softening, and without apology. He told them he had found his queen. He told them she was human, and a scholar's daughter, and carried no supernatural gift he could name. He told them about the prophecy, not as proof, but because they deserved the complete truth, and then he told them that even without it, he would be standing here saying the same words, because some things are simply true, and pretending otherwise is the most expensive kind of foolishness. The hall was completely silent. One representative rose to object, citing ancient law. Cael let him finish. Then Elder Marin rose and quoted the original version of the law, the one that existed before it was changed, 300 years ago, by a king who wanted something different from it. In its original form, the law required only one thing, that the queen be chosen freely and recognized truly. The representative sat down. Cael looked across the hall to where Alara stood at the side wall, wearing a dress that fit her and nothing else grand, holding herself still while the world shifted around her. He held out his hand. She walked to him. Every step was quiet and certain, like every conversation they had ever had by firelight or across a table covered in old books. She took his hand. He said, "Alara Voss, my queen, now and without end." And in the archive room of a distant palace, in a box of an old man's papers, the final page of Doran Voss's journal sat with its last line facing upward, written in his careful handwriting 20 years before anyone was ready to read it. "She will be loved well, I am certain of it.